Hey you guys, welcome to my podcast. My name is Kat and I'm a PA and content creator, obsessed with connecting with like-minded people about all things PA, adulting, and everything in between. On this podcast, we'll talk about tools to find success in your career and how to cultivate joy in your everyday. I'm so excited to have you here along for the ride, so let's freaking do this. Oh my goodness, how do you even start this thing? How do you start one of these things? I gotta go look up a YouTube video. Hold on, I'll be right back. Am I recording or is it not recording? I can't really tell.
1, 2, 3. This is the Bernards here.
It's going too loud. I don't want to be too much in the yellow.
This is the Bernards here. We are testing out the new podcast microphone.
Should I tell them that all I did this weekend was eat wontons? Oh shoot. I think I figured it out. Good morning and happy freaking Monday, fam. If you're listening to this on a Monday, maybe you're listening to this on another day, but I'm so excited to have you here. This episode is going to be really good for my new PAs to be, my new healthcare professionals, people on the brink of graduation, but it even is going to apply to students going into clinical year. I think there's a lot of helpful advice here. We're going to cover a wide range of topics, and yeah, let's just go ahead and get started because I know you guys don't have any time to waste. So thank you again so much for being here. Let's get to it. You guys might know this, you might not know this, but I've been a PA for about 2 years now. I graduated in August of 2019, so I've actually been working like less than that, more like a year and a half because of credentialing, something we'll actually dive into a little bit later in this episode, but I've lived through my struggles, I've had some wins, I've been that new grad baby PA, still feel like it sometimes. So I want to tell you all the do's and don'ts, all my top do's and don'ts of an almost new grad PA, starting with number 1, which is going to be a do. I do want you to understand the value of networking, y'all. If I could just go back to when I was 18, honestly before then, and like realize how important networking was going to be, I definitely would have jumped out of my shell a lot sooner. Like you just cannot be afraid to put yourself out there and create connections in all like factors of life. So definitely a life lesson here, but I'm going to put this into like a clinical context. So let's just say you're in your clinical year, you really should be treating your clinicals like they're your month-long interview. You just don't know what doors those are going to, that experience is going to close or in other ways it's going to open or in other ways could close for you. Even if it's a specialty that you can't see yourself in, you really have to try hard to make a good impression. The health community is small and people talk. And like I said, this could open or close doors for you. So you definitely just want to be on your best behavior and putting your best foot forward. And to be honest, you could do anything for 4 or 5 weeks or however long your rotation is. But if you've been following me, you might know I actually went to school in New York City. And I probably at that time wasn't really interested in making that many connections, at least with my clinical sites, because I knew I wasn't going to be working in New York City. I knew I wanted to go back to Vermont, which is where I'm from, not currently where I'm living. But fun fact, my OBGYN from Vermont actually trained at Lenox Hill Hospital in New York City, and that's where I went to PA school. So it's a super small world. So really here we're talking about how can you create a connection that could potentially lead to a job. And I am not telling you that you can't get a job without rotating at a certain site. I mean, obviously that's just not true. I mean, my case in point, my first job wasn't even in the state I went to school. And I even took my current job without ever having visited the location beforehand. Like my first day on the job was like my orientation, my first day ever being at that location. So talk about taking risks, talk about just leaning on your connections. But I will say having a familiarity with the specialty, location, and the people can help you substantially. Here's my advice for a rotation that you absolutely love and could see yourself working in. Ask for feedback from your preceptor. Ask for their contact information at the end of the rotation. It's simple as that. And maybe you have to set the precedent at the beginning of the rotation, be like, hey, I'm really excited to be here. I would love if we can meet halfway through this clinical experience and talk about what I'm doing well, what I could improve on. One, that's going to totally nurture that connection from the get-go and put an accountability on you, but also your preceptor to make sure you're getting something out of the experience, but also that you're creating this relationship, right? Like I remember getting a mid-clinical rotation eval on my L&D rotation, and my preceptor, Lauren, God bless Lauren, she's absolutely amazing. She probably still works at Lenox Hill Hospital OBGYN. If she does, if you're working with her, have a great time because she's simply the best. But she wrote down that they'd hire me right away if they could, and it was like so flattering. I definitely would have like stopped school right there and started working there, but it was my only my third rotation, so probably not a good idea. But I loved it so dang much. But sometimes your feedback isn't necessarily this straightforward, but you've still had a positive experience. You feel like that relationship between your preceptor, that's reciprocated, right? It's been a good vibe. If you could see yourself practicing in that specialty, practicing there specifically, this is simply what I would say. Hey, thank you so much for a great rotation. I've really learned a lot here and could see myself practicing in this setting, XYZ, post-graduation. If there's an opportunity that opens up in the future, I'd really like to follow up and apply. Do you mind if I get your email to stay connected? This is such a great way to sense if they felt like you were a productive student, if they felt like they could see you being their peer, their coworker one day. And maybe you're also rotating in a place that perpetually does not hire new grads. And sometimes it's just like that. But having this connection, oh my God, it's priceless. Having this point contact, this networking person, they could always refer you to somewhere else. It just holds so much value. So I definitely recommend doing this, even if you feel like that opportunity is going to be closed off in the future and you've had a great relationship with your preceptor, you've had a good experience. I would definitely take advantage of this type of conversation. All right, let's move on to a big don't, and I mean a big ass don't, you guys. This kind of plays into connections a little bit, and you'll kind of see in a moment, but when we talk a little bit about one of our other do's, but this one is do not wait to get your licensing paperwork done until you have a job. Yes, you heard me right. This is one of my biggest mistakes. I feel just awful that I feel so embarrassed that I'm even saying this, but you guys, no one teaches you in school how to freaking get your license, how to apply for a license. It's so screwed up. I don't know why this isn't part of the PA curriculum. However, fair enough. I am actually kind of grateful that they didn't do one in PA school because I also wasn't getting a license in New York State, but so many of my peers were. So it would have been so smart for our program to teach them how to get a license, how to obtain a license. I will say it's so different in every single state. I have tried to get a license in 4 different states because I seem to always be living on the state line, for example, Vermont and New Hampshire, Kansas and Missouri. So every state, I've noticed that every state has its different set of requirements. So what I will say, and I won't do any state specifics, but I cannot stress enough, if you can get any of your paperwork in far ahead of time before you graduate, just do it. And you might only be able to get one piece of paper in, but it starts your file. It just helps, just to have that. Again, I can't give it any specifics, but there's some states that will allow you to basically put in all application materials except your PANCE results. And a lot of that you'll have by the time you graduate, right? You'll have your you should have your diploma, all that stuff, and you're just waiting for your PANCE results. This is going to be so helpful when it comes to credentialing. One of the biggest mistakes I made was just waiting till I had my PANCE results to send everything in. The reason this really sucked for me is that Vermont and New Hampshire, they only meet 1 day a month to review PA applications, and they must be complete to even be considered. I remember I got one piece of my application in late, one piece, and I'm going to blame them, but it was one piece and I had to wait a whole extra month. And the only thing is it came in 1 day late. It came in a day after they did the review. It was so frustrating. And so if you could start any paperwork ahead of time, it's so helpful just to get those wheels in motion. It's also super helpful for your employer, your HR department, just to have that stuff so they can also do the credentialing that's required by the practice, the hospital system that you're working for, because that alone can take months sometimes. So whatever you can do on your end is going to be super helpful. If you're kind of looking at the licensure application materials about 1 to 2 months before graduating, I think that's a really good place. Certainly don't look ahead 6 months. You're not going to be able to get anything in, but 1 or 2 months before graduating, just to see what you're working with, is a really good idea. Do not wait. So let's dive into another do. This kind of ties into stuff that we've already talked about, and it's a little connected, but it's a little different as well. And it's about getting references. Now, why references are important and when you should get them, how you should ask. So really quick, I just want to kind of tie it into the thing we were just talking about, which is licensure. A lot of state licensure will require that you have your preceptor Sometimes sometimes it has to be an MD or DO, sign off on your application or put a letter of reference in there or multiple letters of references in there. So it's super important to make sure you're asking for references along your rotation. Again, every state has different requirements, so don't even get me started on how frustrating this is. And I probably can't answer specific state questions, but I will say I have required up to 3 MD signatures, which has been really rough because I only had like 2 or 3 MDs or DOs. Like I had to ask every single one of my preceptors who was an MD or DO for like one of my state license applications. It was pretty frustrating. So, and I did it at the end of my clinical rotation, which brings me to my next point. Please ask for references along the way. People remember you better that way, and it gets it off your chest right from the get-go. Some preceptors will take away the scariest from you by coming out and saying at the end of the rotation, like, hey, if you ever need a reference, let me know. I'd be happy to be one for you. At that point, say thank you and just get their best phone number, their best email. But let's just say that that's not happening and you're like still sensing a good vibe. You know, it was a great rotation. You do feel strongly that this person would write you a letter of reference or be someone that a future job could contact and give you like good feedback, good like props, you know what I'm saying? So here's an example of what I would say. Thank you so much for a great rotation. You've been a great mentor and I've really learned a lot here. Would you feel comfortable serving as a reference for me in the future? If they say yes, grab a pen and paper, make sure to get their best email and phone number, and write this down in a Word document and save this. Have this in a safe place because you may not even use it for 9 months down the line. Again, like I said, if you're asking for references on the spot at the end of your rotation, you're going to be in a much better place. Again, people remember you better, and better to have more references than not enough, for sure. Also, I just wanted to clarify that I said I waited until the end of my clinical rotations, my clinical year, and that was a big mistake on my part. I wish going back, I would have just asked at the end of my specific clinical rotation, just to make that clear. Okay, we're going to talk about another don't. My friends, this is probably the biggest don't I have. It's so freaking important, and I just feel like it's a non-negotiable. And we could totally dive further into this in another episode. We could talk about contracts, hint, and what you should be looking for, what you shouldn't be looking for, whatever. But this is probably one of the most important things. And just to preface, if this does not apply to you, or this is something you had missed or something you don't have, that is totally okay. Do not fret. Just be mindful for your next position. But what it is do not accept a contract without tail insurance, malpractice with tail. This is insurance that goes with you if you leave the company. Here's an example. You've been working at a company for like 3 years. You saw a patient, Sally Sue, for XYZ. She's doing great. You send her home. Bada boom, bada bang. Now, let's say that you're doing your job, la-di-da, it's been 2 months later and you decide, you know what, hey, I found another opportunity. There's room for growth somewhere else. I've done a good job here. I'm going to move on. You leave the company, you peace out on good terms. Well, Miss Sally Sue has decided to sue you and your old company for something that went wrong with her procedure or whatever it may have been on the date that you had seen her at the old company, at that time when you were employed by that old company, right? Even though you've left that company and your malpractice policy has stopped, your malpractice insurance has lapsed with the company, you still have tail coverage. And this means that the company has an obligation to cover you with this malpractice insurance that covers you for that specific event when you saw that patient while you were employed at that company, even though you're no longer employed there. I hope that makes sense. It's malpractice coverage that essentially follows you wherever you go for a certain amount of time. So while they don't cover you at your new practice, the tail malpractice coverage, it protects you for prior events at that old location while you're employed at that company. I think it's really important to note that some states offer this to PAs already during licensure. They make it a requirement. Some states have restrictions on how long after a visit a patient can file a claim. And some specialties are obviously higher risk for malpractice, like surgery or family medicine, which is obviously a little bit lower risk. And the reason this is so important is because we're freaking new grads, people, right? Like even Chris, who is a new resident, like he will say, Chris is my husband, by the way, he will say the same exact thing. Like he didn't know what he was doing on day one. And while we all have like the clinical clinical knowledge, the clinical skills to do our job, medicine is a constantly like a constant learning experience, right? I remember working with my old coworker Jimmy G. He's an excellent PA. I miss him so much, but he's like in his mid 60s, and he's like, oh my gosh, like I'm still learning every day. Like I learn something new all the time, and from the new PAs and from my coworkers, like I'm always learning. And I just really like that because it shows me the learning never stops. And I know that's exactly where I'm going to be in 40, 50 years, right? So this is just not something that should be lingering over you. You really want to make sure you're covered. I think there's an obligation to companies to cover, especially their new grads. I mean, all their clinicians, because again, we're constantly learning, and even no matter how much experience you have, mistakes can be made. And while I'm not saying you're going to go out and make a mistake, I'm not saying that they're common, they do happen. And it just shouldn't be something that you should be holding on to and carrying forward with you, but you should have tail coverage carrying forward with you. I hope that makes sense. I'm not a contract expert. I'm just sharing with you my personal experience. And this was the way that it was explained to me. This is the way I understand it. So if you guys happen to be an expert in this field or know more about this, please let us know. Please let me know in my DMs, or feel free to look this up on your own just to get your own knowledge about it. And again, you guys, we could totally talk about contracts another day, but that's kind of my synopsis of like the major non-negotiable when it comes to contracts. So let's move on to our last do. Okay, this is one of my favorite ones, and this is something someone told me while I was in PA school. I think it was another PA, and they said, do trust your education when it comes to studying for your boards, which is the PANCE for PAs on here. I know you're probably saying in your head, Kat, the PANCE is supposed to be so hard. That's what I've heard. It's different than anything else we've done. Yes, this is all true. I mean, it's hard for a reason, right, guys? But you have to trust your education. Like, there is a reason that you've been doing well on your end of rotation exams. You know, if you're getting above an 80, and I'm pretty sure right below an 80 is failing in PA school, like there's a reason the bar is that high to pass, which is 80. If you're doing well, you're going to do great on the PANCE, my friend. I'm not saying you don't have to study, but you're going to do absolutely fine. You're going to do great. But I would be lying to you. I'll tell you the story. I would be lying to you if I didn't tell you that I walked out of the PANCE crying, sobbing, called my dad first thing when I got in the car, and I said, I'm never going to be a PA. That was the hardest thing I ever did. This is not a lie, people. This is also the hard truth that 16 years ago, I also called my dad very similarly, having had failed an algebra placement exam in 5th or 6th grade. And I told him, you know what? I'm never going to go to Princeton. I was sobbing. My teacher was like, you need to call your dad. Like, if you need to talk to him, just call him. And guys, I just wanted to be a Princeton girl like Hillary Duff, but you know, that's what dreams are made of, and dreams change. But full circle, when I called my dad the second time, 16 years later, a few years ago, I passed my boards, and I know you can do it too. You have to trust that education. You've been doing well. You're going to do great. And we could totally talk about like how to study for the PANCE in another episode. But I'm just telling you right now, you've got this. You got to breathe. You can do the hard stuff. You got to have some faith. Honestly, the biggest thing I have to say about it is it's just about getting through the PANCE. It's momentum. It's endurance. But I know you can do it. So trust your education. Okay, you guys, so that about wraps up our episode today. I know we talked about things a little bit more catered to almost new grad PAs, but certainly I hope this was helpful for the majority of people listening. And we are going to talk about so many different topics on here. Just to name a few things that I have in mind, I really want to do some OSCE prep, right? That's your standardized patient experience prep, clinical casework. Talk about my PCOS. I've had a lot of questions on that, so I'm really excited to talk about that further. Talk about contracts. Talk about, again, studying for the PANCE, finances. There's just so many things. We could talk about Bachelor in Paradise because your girl is obsessed and it's coming back. People, I'm so excited. But oh my goodness, I have a huge list. I'm actually looking at it right now as I'm talking to you guys about so many different things we're going to do. So definitely make sure to tune in next week. I'm hoping to get a podcast out every single week. If you can go ahead and give this a thumbs up, a review, that'd be so helpful. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. But most of all, go ahead and send me a DM on Instagram if you have any feedback you want to give me, any topics you absolutely need to see, you want to see, or maybe if you're interested in coming on the podcast. I definitely want to do something where we're having like a group chat on here, maybe working with a student, maybe working with another PA, seeing how their experience was. You know, the world is endless here. Our little community can do whatever we want to do, right? So I just want to leave you with this, a little quote from my Instagram friend, Claudia Green, who is a medical student. And she says, go check her reel out, by the way, because this is where I got it from. No part of your journey is harder than the last. And I'll just add here, personally, you can do hard things. You already are. You already have. So my friends, until next time, thank you so much for tuning into my podcast. And I hope you have a great, safe day. I might as well just name this podcast Have a Great Safe Day, because that's all I ever say. The cookie butter from Trader Joe's is an 11 out of 10. 11 out of frickin' 10, people.